Blessed to be able to speak in front of you all today. Need to prepare myself. All right. So I'm Jacob Furst. I and my spouse and family have been members of this church for almost 20 years now. I was raised as a Jew. A very light Jew. We celebrated Christmas, and I chose not to be bat mitzvah, which according to a Jewish colleague of mine says I'm still a Jew, just not a man. And so I guess I'm the go-to when we need a Jewish sermon. So thank you all for coming. In the year 168 BCE, the Syrian king Antiochus sent his soldiers to Jerusalem, where they desecrated the holiest place of the Jews. Antiochus also abolished Judaism, particularly outlawing circumcision and observance of the Jewish holidays. In place of Judaism, Antiochus established altars for the worship of Greek gods. And much like the South Americans in the time of the conquistadors, Jews were offered the choice between conversion and death. A resistance formed, led by the Maccabee family, with Judah, the military leader who would beat the Syrians decisively at two major battles, routing them and driving them out of Jerusalem. While there is some historical discussion on the details of the war, Hanukkah has unquestionably emerged as the celebration of that Jewish victory against the extermination of their faith and culture. The fable of the 8-day oil came much later, perhaps centuries after. The legend claims that during the rededication of the temple, which involved the relighting of the eternal flame, the Jews were able to find just a single jar of oil, which would have kept the eternal flame alive for only a single day. Their request for more oil was not to be answered for 8 days, but that single jar they had managed to find miraculously lasted for that entire 8 days. This bipartite story of war and chalice lighting has led to this tradition of lighting 8 candles over 8 days in celebration of the rededication of the Holy Temple. But Hanukkah is also a metaphor, and it can resonate on many levels. Personally, we can dedicate ourselves to ourselves and to what we want our identity to be in the world. In this metaphor, the world and all its external influences represent the oppressive Syrians, telling us who and how we should be. This is maybe most important in consideration of the Western tradition of New Year's resolutions, in which we affirm how we are going to be different and better in the next year. At the risk of mixing too many religions in today's sermon, Pema Chodron writes about loving kindness, the point is not to try and change ourselves. Meditation practice isn't about trying to throw ourselves away and become something better. It's about befriending who we already are. Think about these words this Hanukkah season and rededicate yourself to being the very best version of who you already are. Toss out those metaphorical Syrians telling you that you should be someone else, and light candles to celebrate the wonderful person that you already are and will continue to be. At the risk also of making this sermon too personal, a few years ago, someone close to me told me that I had no ambition. Stung and at a loss for words, I shrugged my shoulders and the conversation moved on. I thought about that conversation for years and resolved it only in writing this sermon. I realized for that person, ambition meant working hard, making lots of money, and becoming famous. For me, ambition is about making enough to live comfortably and yet not have to worry about money, and very definitely staying out of the public eye. I'm proud of achieving my ambition. In this Hanukkah season, I get to rededicate myself to this ambition, which will be as unique to me as all of your ambitions are to you. Once again, I urge you to toss out the Syrians and celebrate who you are. For us as Unitarians, the first principle echoes this Hanukkah metaphor in affirming the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Hanukkah can also be a time to reaffirm, rededicate our faith as Unitarians. Last week, Reverend Allen's sermon resonated quite well with the Hanukkah story. I swear, we didn't plan it. Right? While we hope that it will never come to something evil crossing this door, that is the Hanukkah story. The Syrians came and destroyed the Hebrew temple and attempted to eradicate the Jewish faith. Let us remember each time we light the chalice that we are dedicating ourselves to the preservation of the seven principles and the hope that they embody. Imagine how different history could have been if only Antiochus had had the seven principles and felt inclined to follow them. The second principle, justice, equality, and compassion in human relations, would have let Antiochus know that his choices with the Jews were inconsistent with equity and compassion. The third principle, acceptance of one another, would have revealed Antiochus's most severe transgression in deciding that the faith of the Jews was simply unacceptable. Finally, our sixth principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, is certainly not possible if community cannot exist between two people, whether they be ancient Syrians and Jews or modern Jews and Palestinians. Finally, the world itself needs our dedication. In particular, we must keep alight the hope for peace and democracy on our planet, a hope that is currently being sorely tested. In our nation, the election of a president who aspires to be the despot of the new American empire. Throughout the world, from Putin's attempt to reclaim the lost glory of the Russian Empire by invading neighboring democracies, to Iran's stance on the eradication of Israel, to Israel's own attempts to eradicate the Palestinian people. Even in nations with well-established democracies, the election of nationalist, right-wing leaders threaten the very democracies that elected them. Once again, the Unitarian principles remind us of our dedication to the democratic world. The fifth principle, in part, reminds us of the importance of the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process. The seventh principle reminds us to respect the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are all a part. Given the history of the Unitarian faith, it is perhaps not surprising that our seven principles accord so well with the tradition and metaphor of Hanukkah. Despite the 2,500 years that separate us currently from the Hanukkah story, it is still as relevant today in this sanctuary as it was that day in the holiest temple of the Jews. However, please let me remind you that Hanukkah is a minor holiday in the Jewish tradition. It is a largely martial story that took place well after the 5 books of Moses had been written. As such, it is not part of the Torah, although the story is told in the Christian Bible in the first and second books of the Maccabees. Almost makes Hanukkah more of a Christian holiday than a Jewish one. Seriously, though, Hanukkah has been elevated and somewhat appropriated by Christians, if only because of calendrical proximity. As Greg mentioned, the Jewish calendar is a fusion of both the lunar and solar calendars, which means that the holidays are always about the same time of the year in the solar calendar, but wander a bit because of the specific days of celebration vary based on the lunar month. Hanukkah is often very close to Christmas, although this is the only year I can remember in which it starts on Christmas Day. It is unfortunate, however, that this temporal proximity leads many, Christians especially, into believing that there is also an importance proximity, which is not the case. Hanukkah does not rank in importance for Jews the way the birth of Jesus does for Christians. Something similar happens with Passover, the holiday celebrating the Jews' emancipation from slavery in Egypt. Because it is temporally close to Easter, the Christian celebration of Jesus' resurrection, many Christians also are familiar with Passover and the tradition of the Seder. Passover is a Torah holiday, so more important than Hanukkah. However, the most important Jewish holiday is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, celebrating humanity's reconciliation with God. If you wish to recognize and respect the Jewish faith, then learn something about Yom Kippur, even though it doesn't fall near any important Christian holiday. Thank you.